Hello and welcome to this webinar. This is Year 7, Narrative Writing, and we have 3 key learning aims that I hope that you can take away from today's session. The first one is thinking about the purpose of narrative writing. Narrative just means story writing, and you're thinking as a narrator, as a storyteller, what's the purpose behind the story that I'm telling? The second is about indirect characterization techniques. You may have heard of the phrase show, don't tell. So that's indirect characterization. It's giving a sense of the character in a clever, subtle way that's more powerful than just telling. And the last thing that I hope that we can understand is the 5-point narrative arc. So you may have heard it called the story mountain. So it's revising the narrative arc so that you feel confident in using it as a storyteller and a story writer. Your narrative task, the story that you're writing, is write a story about a hero or heroes returning home. Now, I would suggest that there are 3 main purposes of narrative writing, of story writing. The first one is to excite, thrill, and entertain readers. So you're making something fun, something exciting, something engaging for them to really throw themselves into. In a way, it's a form of escapism that they can leave their own world and jump into the world that you're creating through your story writing. The next one is to disquiet, disturb, or unsettle readers. Instead of making something fun and exciting, you're making something a bit troubling, something that's a bit upsetting, something that might terrify or disturb or shake them somehow. And so that may well be the purpose of your story writing. You don't want just something that's fun. You don't want something that's just thrilling. There wants to be an underlying sense that there's an unease and something that's unpleasant and disturbing. The third main purpose would be to present and explore serious ideas. So through your story, you may be looking at injustice, about how things are not fair, maybe how rich people and poor people are treated differently in society and how people are judged because of how much money they have. So you may be using a story as a way of looking at inequality and things that aren't fair in society. You may be using your story to look at different races and how they're treated. And so you may be looking at racism in your story. Or maybe you're looking at something like grief and the loss of family members. You may be using your story to really explore some very serious issues and themes. I wanted to give you some examples of this. So, for example, the story of a hero or heroes returning home, a thrilling, exciting, and entertaining story may well be about astronauts who are returning home, heroes returning home from an interplanetary mission, and there are aliens on board that they have to fight in order for them to get safely home. So that's exciting and thrilling and entertaining. So you've set a story in the future. One perhaps that is disturbing and unsettling, that would have a sense of disquietude, is maybe a football star. He walks back home, but this apartment is burgled. So you're creating a sense of terror and fear as this hero returns home, which should be a place of comfort, and it's now a place of exposure. And maybe to present and explore serious issues, you may have your hero or heroes as a soldier returning from war, but being haunted by memories of war, perhaps being haunted with the horrors of war, or even his or her own guilt. So you can see with 3 different story ideas, there are 3 different purposes. However, you may decide that you want to use all 3 purposes in one story. So another story idea, my story idea, is about a prince. This is set in the past. A prince and troops, they're returning home and they're ambushed on the way home. So I want that sense of excitement and entertainment, that they have to fight off enemies. But then when they come home, the place is empty. So I want that sense of unsettling environment, something that becomes more terrifying, maybe even sinister. And then at the end, perhaps his children don't recognize him. So it's exploring serious issues about when absent fathers and children not being able to connect with a parent. So in one story, I've been able to fulfill 3 different purposes. So when you write your own story about a hero or heroes returning home, you might want to think, I'm going to have 1 purpose, I'm going to have 2 purposes, or maybe 3 purposes in one story. Okay, let's talk about indirect characterization. That means that you are showing us the character, and just instead of just explicitly, that means just obviously telling us she was feeling incredibly nervous. So maybe it's this captain fighting aliens, trying to get home. She was feeling incredibly nervous. You would write something more implicit. So you would describe her frail hands started shaking and trembling. Her entire body was consumed by uncontrollable shivering. Can you see you've transformed that sentence? You've shown us what's happening with her hands, what's happening with her shaking and shivering. Instead of just telling us that she's nervous, you've indirectly shown that character's fear and trepidation. There are 4 here that you can think of. Thinking about my story set in the past now of this prince and the troops that come home. Everyone thought the joke was funny, so starting off on an upbeat feeling as the prince is returning home. Instead of just saying everyone thought the joke was funny, I wonder how we could really show that these troops are having a great time. What about the gang were frightening? Gang was frightening. Instead of saying that their enemies were frightening, what could we do? What could we describe to show that they're really terrifying? One of the troops, the boy, was scared. How can we show that fear? And the prince was sad. When he comes home, his children don't recognize him. The prince was sad. How can we show it? Well, here are some examples. So, for example, everyone thought the joke was funny. Tears streamed down the faces of the crowd. Shoulders shook hard, and even the grumpiest of them cracked a huge smile. Everyone thought the joke was funny. Can you see how that sentence has been transformed with indirect characterization? You're showing that there are smiles, there's tears, shoulders are shaking, and everyone's smiling. The gang were frightening. The gang was frightening. So you could have something like this. Each gang member had a red beaded tattoo on their hairy forearm, scars across their cheeks, and they held sharp daggers that glinted in the moonlight. So you're really showing them, again, that sentence has been transformed. We can start imagining the tattoos that have just been designed, just been pierced on their hairy skin, the scars on their faces, and this dark moonlit night as they're being threatened by gang members. And then here, the boy was scared. His teeth chattered, his eyes grew wider, and sweat dripped from his palms. You're really showing that fear and anxiety by the chattering teeth and the eyes and the sweat dripping from the palms. And then this prince was sad. Although he tried to control the sobbing, sharp yelps escaped from his heaving chest, which was now covered with the dampness of his bitter tears. Again, can you see that that sentence has been transformed? You can see the sobbing, the yelps, his heavy chest covered with bitter, damp tears. You can really see his sadness rather than just being told directly. So indirect characterization is vivid description that shows the background of this character and really conveys the emotions rather than just telling us. Okay, now let's talk about the narrative arc. This is the 5-point narrative arc, and as I said, you may recognize it as a story mountain that you've used previously, perhaps in primary school. There are 5 elements, and the first one is the hook. You're grabbing the reader's attention at the start. So even before the exposition, you're grabbing the reader's attention. How do you grab your attention? You can use some dialogue, help, stop, something that someone's saying, something that someone's thinking, to really grab their attention. The next part of the narrative arc is the exposition. You're just explaining and describing the setting, describing the characters. You're starting to give some clues about what's going on, maybe hinting about what might happen. So you're doing foreshadowing. You might include a flashback to show a little bit of their backstory, but about what's happened to them in the past. But the main purpose is to build this connection, this emotional connection and empathy with the main character. Then we have the rising action. You can see it's going steep up that hill. There are problems. There are surprises, there are obstacles, complication, there's crisis, there's confusion. Things are going from bad to worse. And then the climax is the high point that really builds intensity. It's that sharp intake of breath for your readers. That's what you're trying to do, whether the purpose is to thrill them, to disturb them, or to have a serious issue. And then finally, it's downhill. You're starting to resolve some of these issues. You've got the falling action. Some solutions are given, but you may also provide a twist in the tale, as they call it. You might introduce some more problems, and then you end strongly. You end with something that your readers will really enjoy. You end, and it gets them thinking. So that's the 5-point narrative arc. I want to give you some examples from some of the stories about heroes returning home. Let's look at the first one about these astronauts on board their ship. So in terms of the narrative hook, you might have something like Mayday, Mayday, they're in trouble. They know that some kind of trouble is happening. The exposition might describe the captain, it might describe her co-pilot and how well they get on. Maybe we have clues because maybe there's food or footprints, that there are some kind of strangers on board, things that are being left and having to be closed again. And you're foreshadowing, that means you're giving hints of an attack. There may well be a flashback of their time on the planet. Maybe they had a very good relationship with some of the aliens that they met. And you're building that empathy with the captain as she's returning home and looking forward to seeing her family. Then in the rising action, you may well include some surprises. She enters the kitchen as she sees these aliens. She's trying to send a distress message, and although she's able to type it, it doesn't send. Perhaps there's a complication that one of the aliens is actually a child, is actually an infant, so she wants to defend herself, but she's scared about injuring an alien child. Maybe there's a crisis that she has to decide whether her safety or the alien child's safety is more important. And maybe there's confusion. Maybe at first she thinks that they're friendly, and then they end up to be malevolent, and vice versa. That's the rising action. And then in your story, you might well have to have the intense climax, perhaps shooting an alien. Maybe she shoots an alien and we don't know whether that alien's been stunned or it's been killed, or maybe it's the infant alien. And then falling action, the resolution, perhaps they have managed to send the distress signal out, but maybe the aliens have also sent a distress signal, and then the ending is where she gears herself up for another alien attack. Can you see how you've used the 5-point narrative arc to really shape an exciting story that starts with a narrative hook? It gives us the background of the character to build empathy, the excitement of the rising action and the climax, and then you end with resolving some problems, but adding some more. Let's think of another example of a story of a hero returning home. This one perhaps starts with congratulations on the cup final. This is the footballer who's managed to win the cup final with his team. So in the exposition, perhaps you're describing the team, you're describing the footballer, how they really enjoy each other's company. Perhaps there was some fear that they wouldn't win the cup final. Perhaps you're providing clues about the celebrations that he wants to have when he's getting home. Perhaps you're even getting him to imagine his cozy flat. You're foreshadowing him going back to the flat. And there may even be a flashback of the last season when they lost the cup final. So you're building empathy for the protagonist through the exposition. In the next section, the rising action, you've got surprises. So as he enters the flat, the door is already open and he tries to put the light on, but it's not working and it remains dark. Perhaps the complication is something like his good friend has gone missing. And then you've got crisis and confusion when he hears voices in another room. So maybe for this story of this hero returning home, the climax is when he grabs his baseball bat, he grabs a hammer from his bedroom and he goes into the other room. And perhaps your falling action is that actually his family have organized a party, a surprise party for him. But maybe some of the problems could be that the rival team captain is at the party and he really doesn't like that team captain. And also his cat is nowhere to be seen. So although you've resolved problems, you've added a few other problems and you've ended strongly. So hopefully you can see, if you're writing a story about the hero returning home, this football hero returning home to his apartment, you can see how you've used the 5-point narrative to build a sense of fear and an unsettling feeling in the narrative. The last one is my story about the prince that's set in the past. So for the narrative hook, it might be the treasure chest. They've this kind of dialogue that talks about the treasure chest, perhaps it's been locked, and then you describe the prince. You describe how proud he is, how clever and courageous he's been, and you give clues perhaps about the treasure chest, and the kind of things that are in the treasure chest that he's had to lock away. You might foreshadow, that means hint at the celebrations waiting for him. Maybe there's a flashback about when he last saw his wife and his children. Those many years ago, he's been traveling and on his voyages and quests. And so you're building a sense of empathy with the returning heroes. In the rising action, this is the surprise as they turn the corner, this ambush. They see the enemy troops. Maybe their obstacle is that they try to get round and get away from them, but they realize they cannot avoid a confrontation. Perhaps the complications that his horse actually rears and he thinks that he's lost the key for the treasure chest. So all of these problems and issues and surprises as you climb up for the rising action. Maybe the climax is that they manage to outrun the enemy. They manage to slip out them and they've got this huge chase as your climax. And the falling action, the resolution, they manage to get home safely. They manage even perhaps to find the key, but the problem is one of the men is missing. And although his wife is so happy to see him, his children don't recognize him. So you've got that serious issue of absent parents and that disconnection and breakdown in the family. So I hope that now that we've gone through this, you feel confident about writing your own story about a hero returning home or heroes returning home. I hope that you start thinking about the purpose of your writing. Are you going to make it exciting and thrilling and entertaining? Do you want to add a bit of something that's unsettling or terrifying? Or are you going to kind of look at serious issues and explore serious themes through your story? I hope you also really think about indirect characterization, how you can show without telling, how you can say that shoulders were heaving rather than just saying they were laughing, how you can say that sweat was dripping from palms rather than saying that they were nervous, how you can say that they were sobs escaped, frantic sobs escaped, and all of their chest was wet with bitter tears, rather than just saying they were sad, that you're really thinking about vivid description that is dramatic, that really reveals the character's emotions rather than just saying they were sad, they were nervous, they were scared. Show, don't tell. And I hope that also that you can use the narrative arc, the 5 different points. You grab the attention, perhaps with dialogue. In the exposition, you build that connection with the main character. In the realizing action, you add surprises and difficulties and problems. In the climax, you build the intensity, and then in the falling action and the resolution, you solve most of the problems, perhaps with introducing another problem and leaving a strong and memorable ending. I hope that that's helped you. I hope you can have a go at writing that assignment for narrative writing, and join me next time.